I was looking at the at book 3 today. I spent a lot of time just walking through book 3 on my own, and the main commentary I use, James Hamilton's commentary on the Psalms. He doesn't he does a lot of detail on all the different Psalms. He's the one that's got me infected with chiasm. Crazy, which this psalm is a chiasm, but he doesn't have a lot of focus on the structure of book 3, and so I was looking through it to see if there was any discernible structure, and really all I found was that Psalms 73 through 83 are psalms of Asaph. And there is a heavy emphasis on the Exodus and the conquest. So from here through Psalm 83, there's going to be references to the Exodus all throughout. On both ends, Psalm 74 and then Psalm 80 will deal with the temple being burned. So there is kind of a structure around it. Psalm 84 and 85 are psalms of Korah, and then in the middle, Psalm 86 is a psalm of David, and then on the other side, 87 and 88 are psalms of Korah again, and then Psalm 89 is a psalm by Ethan the Ezrahite, and so there's a little bit of there is some structure to it, but it's not as, I'd have to do some more study to see if there's a tighter structure than that. But Asaph, Korah, David, Korah again, and then Ethan the Ezrahite, I think, is kind of a summing up of book 3, because it deals with the covenant with David and the exile. So. But we're going to be looking at Psalm 78 tonight, and this is a psalm that really starts to deal with the main thrust of Book 3, which is dealing with the failure of the Davidic kings, and they bring in the exile. It's the kings who are to blame, because David was a man after God's own heart. God made a covenant with David that one of his sons would sit on the throne forever. And then we have that mountaintop psalm of Psalm 72, a psalm of Solomon, which is dealing with this king as the one who's going to bring in justice and righteousness, and all the nations are going to be blessed, and the nations are going to come in and they're going to pay homage to him, and this is the Messiah. And then the beginning of the beginning of book 3, Psalm 73 is, maybe it's better to be wicked than to be righteous, because it seems like the wicked are the ones who prosper, and so there is this dissonance between the promises of God, of this righteous king who's going to bring in justice and bring blessings to the nations, and reality. And that's where we've been. We've been going through book 3 and this idea of the world is not what it should be. It's not what God has promised. How are we supposed to deal with this? And we saw how at the proper time, at the right time, God's going to bring in perfect justice. He's going to judge the world, and He is going to redeem His people and judge the wicked, and He is going to establish His kingdom. But not yet. Now with Psalm 78, we're going to deal with the fact that God's people have failed. Here's the reason why the world doesn't look like it should, is because God's people have failed to keep covenant with God. And this is not something that is something new that just happens after Solomon dies, but this is something that has been a problem with God's people for their entire existence. And so we're going to be looking at that here in Psalm 78. So kind of following the story of book 3, Psalm 74 has a call for God to remember. remember God, remember your promises. Psalm 77, which we looked at weeks ago, is the psalmist saying, I will remember. And then Psalm 78 is instruction. That's what a maskil is. This is a maskil of Asaph. It's a teaching or instruction or a contemplation. It's a contemplation that calls upon God's people to do not forget. So, God needs to remember. Are you going to remember? God, please remember. The psalmist says, I will remember. And now Psalm 78 is a teaching for us to do not forget. You need to remember. And so that's what Psalm 78 is going to do. So let's look at Psalm 78. Let's read it. And then I want to look at a couple of other passages that give us some background, that give us some more information into the Psalm. So we'll spend several weeks on this Psalm just to make sure that we get it. So let's read it. It's a longer psalm, so it will take us a little bit of time to read through it, and then we'll look at two other passages to give us a little bit of insight into this psalm and what's going on. Okay, so this is a maskil, instruction, contemplation, meditation, psalm of insight of Asaph. All right, let's read this together. Asaph, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he says, Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of Yahweh and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and that they should not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not steadfast, whose spirit was not faithful to God. The Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to his law. They forgot his works and the wonders that he had shown them. In the sight of their fathers, he performed wonders in the land of Egypt and the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and let them pass through it, and made the water stand like a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a fiery light. He split rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock and caused waters to flow down like rivers. Yet they sinned still more against him, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their heart by demanding the food they craved. They spoke against God, saying, Can God spread a table in the wilderness? He struck the rock so that water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can he also give bread or provide meat for his people? Therefore, when Yahweh heard, he was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger arose against Israel because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven, and he rained down on them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. Man ate of the bread of the angels. He sent them food in abundance. He caused the east wind to blow in the heavens, and by his power he let out the south wind. He rained meat on them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the seas. He let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwellings. And they ate and were well filled, for he gave them what they craved. But before they had satisfied their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them, and he killed the strongest of them and laid low the young men of Israel. In spite of all this, they still sinned. Despite his wonders, they did not believe. So he made their days vanish like a breath, and their years in terror. When he killed them, they sought him. They repented and sought God earnestly. They remembered that God was their rock, the Most High God, their Redeemer. But they flattered him with their mouths. They lied to him with their tongues. Their heart was not steadfast toward him. They were not faithful to his covenant. Yet he, being compassionate, atoned for their iniquity and did not destroy them. He restrained his anger often and did not stir up all his wrath. He remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passes and comes not again. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. They tested God again and again and provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power or the day when he redeemed them from the foe, when he performed his signs in Egypt and his marvels in the fields of Zoan. He turned their rivers to blood so that they could not drink of their streams. He sent among them swarms of flies which devoured them and frogs which destroyed them. He gave their crops to the destroying locusts and the fruit of their labor to the locusts. He destroyed their vines with hail and their sycamores with frost. He gave over their cattle to the hail and their flocks to thunderbolts. He let loose on them his burning anger, wrath, indignation, and distress, a company of destroying angels. He made a path for his anger. He did not spare them from death, but gave their lives over to the plague. He struck down every firstborn in Egypt, the first fruits of their strength in the tents of Ham. Then he led out his people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them in safety so that they were not afraid, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies, and he brought them to his holy land, to the mountain which his right hand had won. He drove out nations before them. He apportioned them for a possession and settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. Yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God and did not keep his testimonies, but turned away and acted treacherously like their fathers. They twisted like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places. They moved him to jealousy with their idols. When God heard, he was full of wrath, and he utterly rejected Israel. He forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among mankind, and delivered his power to captivity, his glory to the hand of the foe. He gave his people over to the sword and vented his wrath on his heritage. Fire devoured their young men, and their young women had no marriage song. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awoke as from sleep, like a strong man shouting because of wine, and he put his adversaries to rout. He put them to everlasting shame. He rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loves. He built his sanctuary like the high heavens, like the earth which he has founded forever. He chose David his servant and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the nursing ewes, he brought him to shepherd Jacob his people, Israel his inheritance. With upright heart he shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hand. All right. That's a long one, right? 72 verses. There's a lot packed in there. Let me ask you. We don't have enough. We don't have enough back and forth. This is not Sunday morning. This is Wednesday evening. What are some things that you guys noticed in this psalm? And I ask because I need to take a drink after reading the whole thing. What are some things? Did you notice anything? Is there anything that stood out to you? Is there anything that you have questions about? What did you see in the psalm? Okay, yes, and that's part of the chiastic structure. It is a chiasm. It does mirror itself. The middle of the psalm is verses 33 through 39, which highlights God's mercy, his compassion on them. But on both sides is the Exodus. Yeah, that's part of the structure. Yeah, but it does. It goes forward and then it goes backwards again, right? So you got the Exodus on both sides in the structure. Yeah. Anything else that stuck out to you guys? Anything that you're like, I have no idea what's going on here? Yes. Yeah, they are. There's bookends to both sides of the chiasm. So if you remember, a chiasm is a sandwich, right? And in the middle is the meat, the heart of it. And the heart of this is that in spite of their sin, God was still merciful to them. But on both ends of that, verses 17 through 32 is one side, and it's bookended by, yet they sin still more against him, And verse 32, in spite of all this, they still sinned. Despite his wonders, they did not believe. And then on the other side of the center, verses 41 through 46, they tested God again and again. Verse 56, yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God. So on both sides of it, we've got these bookends that say they kept sinning, they tested him, Yeah, and that's the history of Israel, right? The whole history of Israel is that they did this. Yeah. Anything else that stuck out to you guys? Okay, we're going to have to talk about that because this is actually quoted in the New Testament. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way that Hebrew poetry, they don't rhyme. They do parallels. And so they'll say something in one line that they say again in a different way in the second line. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, his anger arose against Israel. So it's just that's just Hebrew poetry. Jacob is Israel, but that's the way that Hebrew poetry is. They'll parallel stuff. Yeah. All right. Two places I want to go. Again, we won't. Let me give you the outline of this psalm in case you take notes. I don't know how you guys do this on Wednesday nights, but let me. So it's a chiasm, and the center is in verses 33 through 39. But let me give you the outline that I'm going to follow, which we're not going to follow the chiasm as such, but we'll split it into three parts. We're going to look at verses 1 through 16, and I've just called this for future generations, do not forget. So for future generations, that's what the psalm is for. This is Asaph saying, I'm going to explain things for future generations so that they won't forget. Right. And then the middle of the psalm is verses 17 through 56, Israel's unrelenting sin and God's relentless love. So Israel keeps sinning, God keeps showing them mercy. Right. And then verses 57 through 72, which is the other side of the chiasm, for future hope, God's choice of temple and king. And that's what the parable is showing. It's a parable because Asaph is recognizing that the way that God has acted in the past is how he's going to act in the future. That's kind of the mystery of it, is that God is acting this way because he's going to act a certain way in the future. And we're going to see that in the way that this psalm is quoted in the New Testament. So for future generations, don't forget. For future hope, God's made a choice of temple and king. And that's important for the future. Okay, but two places that I want to look at. The first one is very specific. If you guys notice, there's talk of the Ephraimites. There's talk of Shiloh. There seems to be a particular instance that this psalm is honing in on. And that's because it is. So let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 4. 1 Samuel chapter 4. So Asaph is using a particular instance in Israel's history to highlight Israel's unfaithfulness. All right. So this psalm is not just about this moment, but it's like the prime example that he's using to say, this is why this is happening. So book 3 is about the failure of the Davidic kings to bring in the promises, and it leads them into exile. And book 3 is going to end with everything's come crashing down. Jerusalem has been brought to ruins, the temple has been destroyed, and the Davidic king has been carried off into exile. And there's like this pattern. This has happened before, and it happens in 1 Samuel chapter 4. If you remember 1 Samuel, we are introduced to Eli, the high priest, and his two sons. Anybody remember his two sons' names? Roy knows. Roy, what's the name of Eli's sons? Don't remember? Anybody remember? It's Hophni and Phinehas. Yeah. I can't tell you how many times people have talked about, why'd you name your son Phineas? Because isn't he a bad guy? There's two Phineases in the Bible. There's bad Phineas, that's here at 1 Samuel, but Aaron's grandson Phineas is a good guy. he's faithful to God. That's the one that we named our kid after. That's the good Phineas, not this Phineas. All right, in case there's any questions. Sometimes we wonder which one he's going to follow, but anyway, 1 Samuel chapter 4. Hophni and Phinehas are bad priests. They abuse the people of Israel. And God has actually sent a prophet to Eli saying, because you haven't rebuked your sons, you've loved them more than you've loved me, disaster is going to come. And that's what we're going to see here in 1 Samuel chapter 4. And this is background to Psalm 78. So whenever you read about the Ephraimites turning back, when you read about God abandoning Shiloh, and the young men are put to death, and the widows they're lamenting, he's talking about this. Okay, so let's read this in its entirety, so that we are, if you know this story, we can be reminded. If you don't know the story very well, we can have a little bit more information. Okay. The word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines. They encamped at Ebenezer. Here I raise my Ebenezer. Right. They went out to Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in line against Israel, and when the battle spread, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 men in the field of battle. All right, so constant battle between the Philistines there on on the West Bank, right? No one knows where the West Bank is. That hasn't been in the news or anything. That's where the Philistines are, right? On the Mediterranean coast, on the West Bank. Okay. The people came to the camp. The elders of Israel said, "Why has Yahweh defeated us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the covenant of Yahweh here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle is set up. It's set up at Shiloh. This is where the people go to worship God, in Shiloh. Brought from there the ark of the covenant of Yahweh of hosts, who is enthroned on the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. So the people of Israel are treating the ark like the Nazis were going to do in Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're treating it like a weapon. They're treating it like this relic. If we bring the ark into battle, the Philistines are obviously going to be destroyed, because we're carrying God with us. They are literally putting God in a box and bringing the box into the battlefield. That's what they're doing. They're treating Yahweh like the pagans treat their gods. If we carry our God into battle with us, then He will fight for us. But that's not how the one true God operates. You can't just bring Him onto the battlefield and expect that He's going to do what you want Him to do. But that's what Israel's doing. As soon as the ark of the covenant of Yahweh came into the camp, all Israel gave a mighty shout, so that the earth resounded. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, they said, "What does this great shouting in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" When they learned that the ark of Yahweh had come to the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "A god has come into the camp." So you see that Israel's treating the pagan response is what Israel's doing. They're just acting like pagans. They said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has happened before. Woe to us, who can deliver us from the power of these mighty gods? These are the gods who struck the Egyptians with every sort of plague in the wilderness." And what's funny, the irony is that Israel bringing the ark into the battle is the cause of them really being defeated, because the Philistines say, "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So God's come into their camp. Let's fight harder. Let's go out and fight them even more fiercely. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and they fled, every man to his home, and there was a very great slaughter, for 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel fell, and the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So this is a catastrophe. The ark has actually been taken away from Israel, and Hophni and Phinehas, who are the priests, they die. A man of Benjamin ran from the battle line and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and with dirt on his head. When he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. When Eli heard the sound of the outcry, he said, "What is this uproar?" Then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were set so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, "I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today." And he said, "How did it go, my son?" He who brought the news answered and said, "Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great defeat among the people. Your two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured." As soon as he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell over backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died, for the man was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. So Hophni and Phinehas, they would take the sacrifices before they were burnt up, and take the meat. It seems like Eli was participating in this also, because he's fat. He's fat. He falls over. He breaks his neck, and he dies. So now Hophni and Phinehas have died, and now Eli, who is he seems to be the high priest, and he was the judge, he dies also. So it's an absolute disaster for Israel. Now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed and gave birth, for her pangs came upon her. And about the time of her death, the women attending her said to her, "Do not be afraid, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer or pay attention. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel," because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been captured." Kabod is glory. Ik is without. So the glory has departed. Ichabod. So this is the background to Psalm 78. It's the Philistines defeating Israel in battle, carrying the ark away. And it's not talked about, but it's referenced in Psalm 78. It's referenced in Jeremiah, that it seems like the Philistines go and they actually destroy Shiloh also. And the temple, the tabernacle, is it's destroyed by the Philistines in this time. So that's the background. This is the story that is central to Psalm 78. Later on, it's going to talk about God arising and putting his enemies to shame, and that's 1 Samuel 5 and 6, and we'll look at that when we get to it. But another place that I wanted to make sure that we're familiar with is Deuteronomy 32. Because I think there's some references to Deuteronomy 32 in Psalm 78. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, I think Deuteronomy is the most important book of the Old Testament. And in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 32 is the most important chapter in the Old Testament. So, if you are unfamiliar with Deuteronomy 32, you're about to hear it. And you need to be familiar with Deuteronomy 32. If you look back at Psalm 78, if you've got your finger there, you can look and see, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth." Now we'll go over to Deuteronomy 32. This is the Song of Moses. God gives this song to Moses. So Moses will write it down, and it will be an indictment against Israel in the future. What is Psalm 78 doing? It's written so that future generations will not forget. Not forget what? Israel's unfaithfulness, right? So it's in the same pattern as the Song of Moses. Psalm 78 is the Song of Asaph. Deuteronomy 32 is the Song of Moses. They're both written so that future generations will hear it and learn something. That's what Deuteronomy 32 is for, and it begins in a similar way. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. So he's also saying, pay attention, pay attention. Come witness this against Israel. Okay. There's some other places in Psalm 78 that I think are referencing or alluding to Deuteronomy 32. God is called the rock. He's called the rock here. There's some other places that it seems to be an allusion. Deuteronomy 32 is alluded to all over the Old Testament. That's why I say it's the most important chapter in the Bible, in the Old Testament. But let's read Deuteronomy 32. This is the Song of Moses that God gave to Moses as an indictment, a witness against Israel in the future. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of Yahweh, ascribe greatness to our God. The rock, his work is perfect. For all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity. Just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay Yahweh, you foolish and senseless people? Is not he your father who created you, who made you and established you? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of the wilderness he encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. Yahweh alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field, and he suckled him with honey out of the rock and oil out of the flinty rock. Curds from the herd and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan, and goats, with the very finest of the wheat. And you drank foaming wine made from the blood of the grape. But Jeshurun, that's another word for Israel, grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, whom your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. Yahweh saw it and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters, and he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours the earth and its increase, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains. And I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. I will send the teeth of beasts against them with the venom of things that crawl in the dust. Outdoors the sword shall bereave, and indoors terror for young man and woman alike, the nursing child with the man of gray hairs. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory, had I not feared provocation by the enemy, lest their adversaries should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not Yahweh who did all this. For they are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. If they were wise, they would understand this. They would discern their latter end. How could one have chased 1,000 and two have put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them and Yahweh had given them up? For their rock is not as our rock. our enemies are by themselves. For their vine comes from the vine of Sodom, and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are grapes of poison. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents, and the cruel venom of asp. Is not this laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasures? Vengeance is mine, and recompense, for the time when their foot shall slip. For the day of their calamity is at hand, and their doom comes swiftly. For Yahweh will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining, bond or free. Then he will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they took refuge, who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your protection. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to heaven and swear, as I live forever, if I sharpen my flashing sword, and my hand takes hold on judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries and will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword shall devour flesh with the blood of the slain and the captives from the long-haired heads of the enemy. Rejoice with him, O heavens, bow down to him, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children, and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him, and cleanses his people's land. And even as I read that, and I'm thinking about book 3, I'm thinking that a lot of the psalmists are thinking about Deuteronomy 32 as they're writing. I think that they're alluding there. I mean, just as I was reading it out loud, there were pieces that were fitting together for me. There's a lot of things in here. So Deuteronomy 32, think about Deuteronomy 32. Read Deuteronomy 32. It is vitally important for your understanding of the Old Testament. God has rescued his people. They have rebelled against him, and he's given them over to their enemies. But he is going to redeem them, and he's going to establish justice. That's Deuteronomy 32. That's the whole program of the Old Testament. It's the whole story of the Old Testament told before it ever happens. And here the psalmist is drawing upon, I think, Deuteronomy 32 and 1 Samuel chapter 4 and the falling of Shiloh. All right. So a lot of this is just background information to help us to understand what's going on in Psalm 78. God's people, Israel, have rejected him. And so judgment has come upon them. But just like Deuteronomy 32 has, it's prophesied this in advance, it also prophesies that despite their sin, God is going to rescue his people. He's going to avenge them. And we see that in Psalm 78 also. And as we go through some more of these Psalms in Book 3, we're going to see this same theme being developed, that Israel has sinned time and time and time again. But this doesn't catch God by surprise. This is not something that God says, I didn't see that coming. It's all part of what God has already said is going to happen. And it shows the depths of human sin, but it also is going to show the magnitude of God's mercy and grace and love for his people. And as we'll see as we get through Psalm 78, it all comes to a head as God gives to his people David, the shepherd, who is he becomes the type, the pattern that is going to come to a culmination with Jesus, David's greater son. And so that's all background. We didn't get really into Psalm 78 other than to read it, but hopefully that gives you some things to think about, because next week we'll come back and we'll start walking through it. Okay. But the big picture is Israel's sin that is it's not overcome. It doesn't overcome God. God's mercy overcomes Israel's sin, and that's good news for us. There is no sin that you can commit that is going to make you unsavable. There's no sin that you can commit that is going to overcome God's grace. Like we sing, our sins, they are many, but his mercy is more. And that really could just be Psalm 78, that God's mercy is going to overcome sin.